Hello, my name is Alyssa Gilden. I'm a licensed psychologist and licensed specialist in school psychology, and we are going to talk about the match. Before we dive into the match itself and the intricacies of match policies and those kinds of things, I just want to lay the groundwork and introduce the two major organizations that really we're talking about when we're talking about the match. The first, I'm assuming most of you here watching today know, is APPIC, the Association of Psychology Postdoctoral and Internship Centers. And APPIC is the membership organization of postdoctoral and internship programs and it really organizes the match. The match is then done through a company called the National Matching Service, or NMS, which works with APPIC on the, quote, design, execution, and delivery of the APPIC match. I have here on the screen a number of links today that are just up here as resources for you. So the first link is on the APPIC website, and it is just the page that is about the APPIC match, and it itself has many different links to a ton of resources and information and other things where you can learn more about the match. It has guides and resources and things like that. The second is the link directly to the match policies, which is really the focus of what we're going to talk about here today. Then you've got the link to NMS. Most people don't necessarily spend a lot of time on the NMS website, but it is a wealth of resources as well. And then lastly, I've got a link to the match statistics where you can find information about students and interns and programs for the last 10 to 15 years or so. So here I have key dates. These dates are really guidelines. They don't shift a lot from year to year. So July is when internship registration is sent to training directors. You do need to make sure and register with NMS every single year. It's also when applicant registration opens. Most applicants are not looking into programs in July, but it does open. November is the most common time that internship deadlines occur. So it might be November 1, it might be November 30, or anything in between, but it really is the most common time that programs have as their own deadline, which each program is in charge of setting. December is when most programs are telling their applicants whether or not they have an interview at that site. So December 1 is certainly the recommended date by which all applicants should register for the match in order to get their applications in. It is also when interview notification dates, which is what I was just talking about, are meant to be set. There's a big misunderstanding here, but it's an important misunderstanding to understand. Many applicants, and probably training directors as well, understand December 15th to be the interview notification date. It is the most common interview notification date. What APPIC requires of its programs is that every program identify a date by which they will let all applicants in phase 1 know whether or not they've received an interview. The reason most internships have their application deadlines no later than the end of November is so that programs have enough time to review applications before they let applicants know whether or not they have an interview. And so typically that is December 15th, giving programs about 2 weeks to look at all of that. You are welcome to accept applications into January and set your interview notification date in January, as long as, again, you have that interview notification date, you make that interview notification date public, and you notify all of your applicants of their interview status. But to sum that all up, December 15th is the most common interview notification date. These dates here on this slide do shift from year to year. They stay around the same time, usually a Wednesday, usually a Friday, those kinds of things. But it is the rank order deadline. It is the deadline by which all programs must submit their rankings of what interns they hope to accept, and all interns must submit their rankings of what programs they hope to match with. Phase 1 match day. Results are distributed no later than 10 a.m. Eastern on match day. It is usually distributed much sooner than 10 a.m. Eastern, but that is the latest time a program will find out what interns matched with them, and interns will find out what program they matched with. Training directors can and should begin contacting their interns no sooner than 11 a.m. Eastern on match day. And the reason for that gap is because hopefully you're happy with the applicants that you've matched with, and hopefully applicants are happy with the program that we've matched with. But of course, we all know there's a range of emotions that can be associated and that can occur on match day. So that that gap where results are distributed no later than 10 a.m. Eastern, and training directors should contact interns no sooner than 11 a.m. Eastern, is really just to allow students, everybody, to kind of process their emotions. The list of programs that are available for Phase 2 also becomes publicly available no later than 11 a.m. Eastern on Phase 1 match day. So the Phase 2 application deadline. You see that deadline here is in quotes, and it's important to understand what that means. Programs must accept applications at least until that deadline. So that gives students who didn't match in Phase 1 about 6 days to process their emotions, research all the programs that are available, and get their applications and cover letter together to apply for new programs. And so you must accept applications at least until that deadline. You can accept applications further than that. That is just the first deadline that you are allowed to set. Phase 2 rank order deadline. So by 11:59 p.m. Eastern on rank day is the deadline to submit your rankings for what interns you want to come to your site, and for interns applicants themselves, what programs they want to go to. I mentioned that deadline this time around of 11:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's important to know that the system can get kind of glitchy the closer that you get to that deadline. So we definitely recommend that you submit your rankings sooner than that deadline, but of course you have up until that time. Phase 2 match day looks exactly like Phase 1 match day, where results are distributed no later than 10 a.m. Eastern, and training directors should contact applicants that have matched there no sooner than 11 a.m. Eastern. Phase 2 match day then is the beginning of the post-match vacancy service, which really happens from March, from Phase 2 match day all the way through October. Very few programs are still accepting applications by October, but that's when it officially shuts down. So I want to take a moment just to mention eligibility. It has changed in the last 10 years or so, so it is important to understand. For Phase 1 and Phase 2, students who are eligible to participate in the match must meet all 3 of the bullet points listed here on the slide. So they must be enrolled in either an accredited doctoral program or a program that has been granted a site visit. They must be authorized to participate in the match by their doctoral program, meaning their DCT has said this person is ready to apply for internship, and they must not already be committed via the APPIC Match. So they can't be off on internship and wanting a second internship or anything like that. That third point is pretty rare to come up. The first 2 are important to understand. What is also important to understand is that there are reasons, or there are programs that are eligible to participate in the post-match vacancy service, the PMVS, that aren't accredited or have yet been granted a site visit. And these are called PMVS only eligible doctoral programs. There's a whole lot of information on APPIC's website about this. Why I'm hitting on this really closely is because a lot of programs, when they look at APA accreditation, they say, we know our students are in accredited doc programs because they participate. We only recruit from the match. But it is important to understand that students are eligible for Phase 1 and Phase 2 if their doc program has been granted a site visit but is not yet accredited, and they're eligible to participate in the post-match vacancy service beyond that site visit requirement. Again, there are specific requirements about it. You can find all that on APPIC, but understanding what types of programs your students come from and what the curriculum is something that's important to do. For programs to be eligible to participate in the match, right now, at the internship level, you must be an APPIC member, so this can be provisional membership or full membership. APPIC is requiring APA accreditation in order to participate in the match. So for programs who have been APPIC members for 3 years or longer, July 2023 is that deadline for when you must be accredited by. For new programs or who apply for APPIC eligibility really 2020 and later, you're granted a pre-accreditation eligibility period, meaning you have a limited number of matches that you can participate in while you seek accreditation. Beyond that, if you are not yet accredited, you won't be eligible to participate in the APPIC match. For doc programs to send their student to the match, there are some requirements around that. They're called doc program associates, and policies around how to become a doc program associate is available on APPIC's website. So if an understanding of how doc programs are eligible for the match, I would encourage you to go to the website. All right, now what is meant to be the meat and potatoes of this webinar, which is a bit of a summary to the match policies themselves. So the first point is that for applicants and for programs, it is essential, it is required that you provide complete and accurate information. You want to provide as much information as you can that would impact an applicant's decision to apply to your site in the first place and to rank your site when that happens. If you are a religious organization that has a religious mission, you need to make that known so that applicants can understand whether or not they're going to be a good fit. If you had forensic opportunities in the past, but you no longer do, or neuropsych has become available, you want to provide your most up-to-date, complete, and accurate information. Now, I'm going to call back to when we just talked about the timeline of the match. It really is almost a year-long process. And what that means is the information that you're putting out in the fall of 1 year is going to impact whether or not interns choose to rank you and become trainees at your site the following fall. So you really want to be doing your best at thinking forward as far as you can into what that training opportunity is going to be. You must communicate interview status. So we talked about the interview notification deadline earlier. You must, in phase 1 of the match, you must tell all applicants to your program whether or not they have received an interview at your site. Phase 2 is a little bit different. It is not required that you say that just because phase 2 happens so very quickly. But it is nice to certainly tell people if they're not getting an interview. That's a kind thing to do. It's considered best practice. It is not required in phase 2. It is required in phase 1. The match itself is legally binding. Anybody you put on your rank order list, if they match at your site, you must provide training to them. So if you have an applicant that looked great on paper and they come to the interview and you are not so sure about them, do take time to think, is this a trainee I want to have at my site? Because once you put them down on your rank order list, they might become an employee, a trainee at your site. And that's just a really important thing to understand, that the binding nature of the match. So then we get into a little bit of it gets really complicated because there's a lot of if-thens. So you must offer all positions in phase 1 if funding is assured. So what is meant by that is if you know you're going to have a trainee in your site, it has to be offered in a match. You're not allowed to withhold it because you know someone's coming in phase 2 or post-match, or your boss's niece's dog walker, you think they're going to apply directly to you later if they don't match. You're not allowed to do any of that. If you are not sure of the funding of a position, like you don't know if you're going to get the salary and benefits, you do not have to offer it in phase 1. I'm going to harken back to when I just told you the match is binding. If you match with someone and then you find out you don't have funding, you're going to be in a really tight spot because the match is legally binding and you've essentially just offered employment to someone and you don't have the funding there. So if funding is not assured, you don't need to offer it, but short of you're not sure if you're going to have the money, you have to offer all your positions in phase 1 if you are participating in the APPIC match that year. If a position is offered in phase 1, you must offer it in phase 2. Again, small caveat, If you choose not to fill it for the whole year, like somehow you have found out between when you ranked those students and when it's time to rank phase 2, that the funding may not come through or that the funding has even fallen through, you don't have to offer that position in phase 2. You can say, we're withdrawing from the match right now. We're so sorry. We hope to have applicants again next year, but we're not going to have it this year. So if you choose not to fill the slot for the entire year, or if you're forced to for funding issues, whatever reason, you obviously don't have to offer it at that point because you don't have the funding. But there's no other reason that APPIC allows for you to not offer a spot that was offered in phase 1 in phase 2. Again, you can't withhold for somebody in the post-match. You can't say, oh, that person didn't match, so we're going to do this outside of the ranking system. You have to offer it in phase 2. Phase 2, I've been throwing these phrases out there for this whole webinar. I'll take a second to mention that depending on when you came up through the psychology world, this language may be pretty different from what you were used to. So it's not here on the screen, but if you've heard the phrase clearinghouse, if your staff is using the phrase clearinghouse, we're gonna throw that phrase aside. There is no more clearinghouse. There is phase 1, there is phase 2, and there is the post-match vacancy service. Phase 2 is phase 1, but faster. So you've got the applications through the APPIC, you can interview your students, you rank, you wait for match day, and you match. It used to be that students matched in phase 1 or really were going to go into what was called the clearinghouse or may not find a slot. Maybe they'd sit out for next year. There are so many reasons why a student and a program might end up in phase 2, that making sure you're looking at any stigma you've got inside of you about yourself as a program or about applicants who are in phase 2 is a pretty important thing to do. You really should see phase 2 as phase 1. It works a lot faster. You've got anybody doing interviews, you got to get them together on a really quick basis. It can be hard logistically, but it really is just another match opportunity for applicants who didn't and programs who didn't match in phase 1. The last point here on the slide, no communication of ranking information. It is important to know that you cannot communicate ranking information, meaning you are my top choice, we're putting you number 1. You cannot communicate that in any way in phase 1 or phase 2. This is really different from other fields, and particularly other medical fields that have a match. The strategies in other fields look really different. So sometimes, particularly programs that are based on hospitals or have integrated care, it gets a little tricky because you're hearing from your colleagues like, oh my gosh, of course we tell them they're our favorite. They wouldn't rank us if they didn't. But in psychology, you may not communicate or solicit ranking information in phase 1 or phase 2. The one slight asterisk to that I'm hesitant, well, I didn't even put here in words because I'm always hesitant to put it out there, but it is in the match policy, so I want to make sure to mention it, is you can ask for preference information if that is somehow required for interview logistics. So what I mean by that is if you have different tracks somehow and you're trying to schedule interviews across 2 different tracks and they're just not going to see everybody that day and it's just not going to be possible, and in order to schedule the day, you have to know, do you want to meet with this faculty or do you want to meet with that faculty? If it is required for interview logistics, you can ask for preference information, but you're not supposed to use that information in your own ranking. So if the lesser preferred track loves them, they should put them as number 1. They shouldn't knock them down because of this information. And the other thing is, if you are asking for that preference information, you must publicly state that you ask for that information. So it should be in your application materials. So you must publicly state that you ask for it and why you ask for it. Short of that caveat about interview logistics, just know that you cannot communicate or solicit ranking information in either phase of the match. Another just really important thing to understand going off of that idea of not communicating or soliciting ranking information is that all faculty participating in recruitment need to understand the match policies and the match process. A lot of times, maybe you're here as a training director. Training directors become pretty well versed in this information, but we don't always pass it down to our faculty, and our faculty may be over there talking to our MD colleagues who do different things with soliciting information. So they come into an interview and they may ask a question that in the psychology world is not considered an appropriate interview question. It's important that all of your faculty understand the match policies, understand what we're talking about here in this webinar, understand the match process, the timing of it all, the ranking of it all, those kinds of things, and understand what are and are not appropriate interview questions. So thinking about what is our stigma in hiring, what is bias in hiring, what are all of those things is important that you distribute, that you're really sitting down with any faculty participating in any part of recruitment and is understanding it all. I think one of the last things I have here is this next point about contacting matched interns. So on match day, we're like moving forward real fast from interviews all the way to match day. On match day, training directors must contact interns who have matched with them. You can do that as soon as possible, but not before 11 a.m. Eastern on match day. That goes for phase 1 and phase 2. We talked about that timing a little bit earlier. It's pretty common practice that starting at 11, training directors call their applicants. Applicants are expecting that phone call. It is a nice touch, and it is required that you do contact them. In addition, you must send a match agreement in writing within 7 days. So according to APPIC, that match agreement must include their stipend, their benefits, and their start and end dates. Your HR may have more information that goes in an employment letter, and that's just fine. It must include at least those 3 things. It must be sent, they used to say postmarked, it can now be emailed within 7 days, and you must CC the doctoral program director of clinical training, their doc programs, DCT, when you send that. I mentioned language earlier, and then I've talked a lot about phase 1 and phase 2, but I haven't spent a lot of time talking about the post-match vacancy service. PMVS looks very different from year to year in terms of the numbers of students in it, sometimes the readiness for internship of the students in the PMVS. It also is really, really different from the first 2 phases of the match, so it's just important to understand what it looks like. So you can advertise all available positions. There aren't the same requirements. You know, we talked about how if it's offered in phase 1, it must be offered in phase 2. It doesn't have to be offered in the PMVS. It can be offered in the PMVS. That's really up to your program. It's beneficial if you want interns at your site and you haven't matched to offer it in the PMVS, because otherwise you're not going to have interns at your site. You can also make an offer to any applicant at any time after 11 a.m. Eastern on phase 2 match day. So it does not look the same. It does not go through NMS. There is no ranking. It is much more of a traditional, you interview an applicant and you make a job offer to that applicant if and when you're ready to make a job offer. You can offer it to anyone. They don't have to meet those eligibility criteria earlier, although I would caution you to think about why those eligibility criteria are in place, and you can do it at any time. You should verify that applicants are not matched elsewhere. That's pretty rare, but it has been known to happen. So making sure, maybe contacting APPIC, making sure they are not matched to another internship. And you should verify that the applicants have been deemed eligible by their doctoral program. Because anyone can participate in the match, and because you can, in the post-match, and because you can offer it to anyone, it is possible that somebody who was, I'm ready to go on internship, I'm ready to be done with this whole doc program thing, but their DCT said you're not ready, you're not at that competency level, you are just not ready for internship. So they weren't eligible to participate in the match, but they are gonna just go apply to anybody in the PMVS. And so you probably want to check whether or not they have been deemed eligible by their doctoral program. And if they have not, I would recommend caution in terms of understanding why they have not matched in that. An offer in the post-match is as binding as the match. So once you extend the offer to a student, that's as if you ranked them, as if they are already legally at your site. You shouldn't be offering a post-match spot to 5 different people and it's first come, first served or anything like that. And you are required to, the same requirements about that about that match letter, where you must tell them in writing within 7 days the stipend, the benefits, the start and end date, and you must include the DCT when you send that letter. So that the offer letter part, the match agreement part, is the same as phase 1 and phase 2, but it's quite a different process. Finally, if you still have questions, if I have spent 30 minutes of your time and you've still got questions, the APPIC, I didn't use that acronym yet here, that's the Application for Psychology Internships. The APPIC and NMS both have lots of help documents, a lot of information on there. APPIC has a ton of resources and FAQs. And of course, we at Clover are here for you. We do offer hourly consultation. So if you're just like, I'm really stuck on understanding this part of the match, or this situation has come up and I would just really like to talk to someone, I encourage you to reach out to us here at Clover. It's been lovely to be with you all today, and I wish you the best of luck in this match season.